Allianz. Supporting all 32 counties through the Allianz Leagues.
Hello and welcome to the Throw-In Independent.ie's GA podcast in association with Allianz. I'm Will Slattery and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by Michael Verney. Michael, hello.
How's it going? Well, I kind of thought I'd wake up this morning and I'd be just wrecked from hurling, but I'm actually buzzing. I'm buzzing from hurling. I was that match on Sunday, watched 2 on the telly on Saturday, listened to 1 on the radio, watched 1 this morning, watched League Sunday last night. But yeah, it's like almost like absence makes the heart grow fonder, and you just want more and more and more.
Oh yeah, hook it to my veins. It was such a busy weekend, so much going on. We're going to be joined by Brendan Cummins and Colm in a couple of minutes to go over all the action, some very good results. How did it feel for you to actually be back out of the game, though? I know it's one of the things you love to do, be out there at the weekend covering the matches. Where were you sent?
Yeah, I was in Navan for Offaly and Meath. Probably not the most marquee game of the weekend, and probably one of the least discussed games of the weekend. But when you're kind of covering usually Division 1 teams, you don't get to see your own county much. So it was great to see, just to see how Offaly were going, and I was impressed yesterday. They conceded probably 3 sloppy goals, but put up a huge score against Meath, 3-25, and they have probably a season-defining game next weekend against Kerry in Tullamore. Kerry had a big win over Down, hit 4 goals in the second half. So yeah, it probably won't get as much coverage because it's away from the top tier, but Division 2A is interesting with Offaly and Kerry and Carlow in particular, the leading lights there. So it's going to be interesting. And
where are Offaly at the moment? They obviously had a very disappointing year not getting out of Christy Ring last year. Like, is morale on the floor? Is there hope for 2021? Like, what's the feeling there?
Yeah, last year was a bit of a disaster, really. The 2 games that they needed to win were the Antrim game in the last round of the league. That result didn't go their way with a last-minute goal for Antrim, so they missed out on the 2A final. And, a disastrous result again against Down, beaten on penalties in the Christy Ring semi-final. If they got to the final, they would have been promoted. So they missed 2 promotions last year. And while you think morale should be on the floor, it's funny. It's definitely not. There's a good kind of vibe around the place, and even Shane Lowry's investment, that did perk people up an awful lot. Just because it's a nice token from him, and it's the fact that it's an investment in underage in particular. It's an investment in the future. I know training have been going well with Offaly, and they looked slick yesterday. Last year they probably played an exaggerated kind of game plan where it was too short, too exaggerated. It's a bit more direct yesterday, but a lot of really kind of slick passing, and I said they put up a good score. There's an interesting one actually. My own clubmate Brian Watkins from Borough, I put up the picture on Twitter. He always wears the socks pulled up, so he had a big pair of green socks pulled up, and his 14 teammates had little white short ankle socks on, so he stood out like a sore thumb amongst them all. But kind of an old school kind of mentality. But Offaly are going fine. Just next Sunday is going to be the big one against Kerry. They need to get a result there. It's funny with the way the league is this year, and with the way how close it is to championship. One bad result can put you back on the back foot big time. So getting anything from that game in Tullamore next Sunday will be big.
Yeah, and we'll turn our thoughts towards the Allianz League Division 1 now. Delighted to be joined by Colm and Brendan Cummins. Guys, how are things?
Very good.
How are things, Brendan? Michael?
Brendan, we might kick off with that win in Corrigan Park for Antrim over Clare yesterday. We were delighted to have hurling back naturally, but then to get such an unexpected result and such a great performance from one of the underdogs who I think a lot of people predicted to really struggle this year. What a way to kick things off.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Look, there's no doubt about it. I've seen Antrim in the flesh to my cost 4 times with Kerry last year when we eventually got within 3 points in the final. But Darren Gleeson, first of all, has done a fantastic job up there. I think they had great raw materials. Liam Sheedy was up there 3 years ago now when they were starting to motor a little bit. Darren was coach then. He took over as manager. But I suppose the key with them is that they're a big, strong physical team. They obviously have amazing hurling skills as well. But if you look at them right across their men, we'll call it, so they're well set to deal with the elite sport, I suppose, that's Division 1 hurling. And we saw it up in Corrigan Park. I mean, Clark was extremely good getting the goals, but overall, Paddy Burke as centre-back, Keelan Malloy would get on any inter-county team around the country. So I think the narrative out of the game was, oh my God, Clare were bit by Antrim. They must have given Antrim a loan of the hurleys to play him. Certainly that's not what I'd see of Antrim. But for Clare, it is certainly a bit of a setback. But I wasn't overly surprised now, to be honest with you, that Clare got beaten up there.
Yeah, and Colm, it's interesting, as Brendan mentioned, the job Darren Gleeson has done 2020, getting promoted to a Division 1, winning the John McDonagh Cup, and then taking such a big scalp on day one, quietly going about his business up there, but one of the better managerial jobs over the last 12 months.
No doubt about it. In fact, if you take the two, probably most progressive managerial jobs are both Tipperary men, because Liam Cahill with Waterford last year, to get that Waterford team after no championship win in 2 previous seasons, to get them to an All-Ireland final now, albeit they didn't win their first game yesterday. So 2 Tip men have been leading the charge, I suppose, pro rata with teams, but Darren Gleeson for sure. And to see Antrim pull off a result like that really is a lift to hurling everywhere. And I suppose a lift to counties that you would probably class in that bracket. It goes beyond what we'll say Laois did with Dublin even 2 years ago in the championship. It's just such a fantastic result for them, and a result they really haven't got of that stature for a long time. Obviously they beat Dublin in a championship game when Anthony Daly was in charge in Croke Park, but just a fantastic result. And to see Neil McManus's lead score yesterday, and we are raving about it, and we are talking about it. Obviously, we're talking about it here, but if it was any other county, we'd be saying, if that was any Kilkenny player, Tipperary player, Limerick player, we would be just talking about it all day. And it really was a brilliant score, the way he stepped back. Obviously, he had the wind with him, but a confident score. And I'd imagine watching that game, and I have to say, I never heard noise from subs and stewards that I didn't realise they could generate so much noise there. But McManus' score for me it could be the highlight of the league, perhaps even after the 5 rounds.
And I think as well, though, it's probably important to mention, and we might come on to Clare in a while anyway, and their woes at the moment, the power of having a county board full square behind you with a social media platform that's there to promote hurling and make sure that the senior hurling team goes well. I remember last year, Antrim, before they played the Joe McDonagh final, they had a virtual up to the match. They had all this kind of stuff going on around it just to promote hurling across Antrim. And we have a good group of players here. It was mentioned by Kieran Clark after the game. I hope our supporters watch this. So the connection between what they're trying to achieve and the supporters is really strong. And they're getting huge backing from the county board as well up there. And they are coming on in leaps and bounds. So I'd be delighted for them to the way they performed yesterday and get a good result like that.
Yeah, and just to sum up, I suppose, the surprising nature of the result, there was a good line in Frank Roche's report where he asked an Antrim official how long or when was the last time Clare had been beaten by Antrim. He said, here, I'm going to have to go and check the book of Kells, because I think he thought it had been so long he wasn't even sure himself. And Michael, Brennan touched on it there, from a Clare perspective, you're going into this league with all these question marks. It's been, it's never a good sign, I suppose, when there's been multiple Sunday reads and Saturday reads outlining, I suppose, a bit of the dysfunction in the county, and then to get off to this terrible start, and now Wexford next weekend in a huge game all of a sudden. Like, how debilitating do you think the outside noise has been to the team?
It's hard to say, but Brennan makes a very good point there from a point of view of the positivity within Antrim and within the county and within the setup. And you can't, like, there might be great positivity, I'm sure there is, within the Clare setup, but everything they're hearing, everything they're seeing is not positive. So that can seep in. Just to say, though, this result, this wasn't like a smash and grab or anything like that. This was a brilliant Antrim performance throughout. After the first water break, I thought they dropped a man back and kind of basically stopped Clare at source there. O'Donnell and Shannon didn't get the sort of ball in the second quarter that they were getting in the first quarter. And they were really, really good on the ball, just really smart. There was no aimless clearances or anything like that. From a Clare point of view, Brian Lohan has said that there's always pressure on, but there's obviously a bit more pressure on. He's going, obviously, we're playing Davy next week, where there's always going to be a needle to that game anyway, and there was needle to it last week. But there's a nice bit of pressure building. The narrative, whether it's true or not, the narrative of, Clare are in disarray, that will gather pace now. And if it hadn't seeped into the camp, it's probably more likely to seep in now. So huge game for them weekend. And on the Antrim point of view, like Darren Gleeson already said, by 3 or 4 o'clock yesterday, they looked past yesterday and we're already looking towards next weekend. And they're going to Nolan Park next weekend, coming up against Kilkenny. So, some chance to take, the scalps don't get much bigger. So that's a huge one for them next weekend as well.
No, really interested to see if they can back it up or how they even, go into that game with the confidence that the Clare win will have brought them. But Colm, just again on the Clare point, interesting to hear Shane Dowling last night on League Sunday on RTE saying that from a player's perspective, he would say 100% he thinks that the outside noise is having a big impact or would have a big impact, and it's impossible to block that out as a player, as much as they'll probably try, and the coaching staff will probably try to get their minds just purely on the game. Though when there's so much disarray going on around you, it can be hard to keep that out.
Yeah, I would imagine it would be hard to keep it out. Having said that, it probably wasn't an issue going up to Corrigan Park over the weekend. I mean, I'm pretty sure it wasn't foremost on their mind. But having said that, when you're in the heat of battle, it's quite often that these things manifest. And when it got down to it, in the second half, the response wasn't really there from Clare. And that's the concerning thing for Brian Lohan now, that they didn't dig as deep as Antrim, and he raised that question afterwards. They were beaten on breaking ball, and he has to ask that question why. And he really does have to examine: has the events of the last 3 or 4 months and the way it has played out really since last year's convention, and obviously it was there during last year's championship because it's been highlighted how it was felt that preparations were impacted by the availability of training grounds and the availability of Cusack Park and all of that. It, theoretically, it shouldn't really impact on a group of players, but this is the source of every conversation relating to hurling in Clare over the last 3 or 4 months, and players are no doubt asked about it. They talk about it at home. They talk about it with friends. They talk about it among themselves. It's almost like a soap opera. So, yes, it does have an impact, and it probably manifests in the heat of battle. And it shouldn't have a huge impact, and maybe it won't come to that. Maybe Clare will go out next week and there will be a response against Wexford, and they will beat Dublin and Laois, and they'll have a battle with Kilkenny like they had last year. We'll recover. But if there's another result like this, like what they experienced yesterday, then I think there will be a greater focus on the events in Clare over the last 3 or 4 months. And obviously one of the big issues has been Cara Lohan and the inadequacy of Cara Lohan, the training of centre of excellence, and what kind of impact has that had on Clare hurling. You must remember, Antrim have been without their home ground, Casement Park, for the last 8 years. And they seemed pretty steeled yesterday. They're playing in Corrigan Park. Casement Park may not be available to them. Their traditional home may not be available for another 3 or 4 years, but they've got on with it and they've moved on. And maybe Clare will look at it and say, well, like, whatever we have to do here, we have to do. And I think there will be a response against Wexford next week.
Interesting to see, Will, as well, what they do with John Conlon. I thought that was very left field, playing him centre back. For a guy coming back from 15 months out, big, powerful forward, one of the most dangerous forwards in the game, to put him into such a pivotal position, and it takes time to bed in. I wonder, would they have taken that experiment against, if they're playing Kilkenny or Wexford in the first round, would they have tried that experiment against them? I don't know if that was a disrespect to Antrim or not, but I'd imagine he'd be back up in the forward line. So it's going to be interesting to see if Lohan reevaluates kind of his positioning of Conlon in particular.
Yeah, it's funny because when I remember you emailed in the team news on Friday night, and you described it as left field, and it was kind of just a strange one to bring him back in a new position. And as you made the point there, were they thinking it's Antrim, we might be able to experiment a bit and get away with it? And obviously they didn't. And Brendan, we might give you the last word on Clare before we move on to the Limerick Tipperary game. Like, where do you weigh in on it? Are we overreading the kind of the off-field stuff after a bad display on an opening day after a long layoff, or for you, does it have an impact?
I think it does have an impact, all right. There's no doubt about that. I've been in dressing rooms before where it's been a little bit helter-skelter around the outside the group, and lads sit down when they're togging out or they're jogging around the pitch and they're going, oh, jeez, I wish people would leave us alone and we get playing. But I think to look at a more positive aspect for Brian Lohan, when I'm involved with any team, I'm very big into job descriptions. And I think he has to get clear job descriptions for each one of the players, what's expected in each position to help the other players around you look good. And at the moment, and I saw last year with Clare, like they got whipped against Limerick, they kind of bowed out a little bit against Waterford as well. And the team looked a little bit rudderless for all the world. So I think now that's got to be the focus for Brian Lohan and his managing team to get over Wexford next week, is to infuse confidence into the players by playing to their strengths, letting them know that if you do X, Y and Z, which you're really good at, the team will win. And I think if he can do that in the next couple of days, it'll certainly be a good step towards recovery, because certainly all is definitely not lost in Clare. They're fantastic hurlers down there. They just need a little spark or a little break maybe somewhere along the line to go their way and get a result the weekend or the weekend after. And sport is gas, all is forgotten very quickly, you know, and suddenly they'd say, oh, it was a master plan by Brian Lohan maybe before the summer's out. You never know.
Yeah, and especially with Davy to come next weekend, it doesn't get any juicier leading into round 2. And Brendan, you know, Limerick Tipperary, the big game on Saturday night, it was important for Tip anyway not to lose maybe after their recent record over Limerick, but disappointingly from there, no scores from play in the second half. They were outscored, I think, 6-1 in the final quarter. Now, you saw some positives as well reading your column in today's Irish Independent. So you are a bit more glass half full after even losing that late lead?
Yeah, I was. What I liked with Tip is that they moved away from the traditional 3-man inside or 2 men inside and launched it into the edge of the square. For the last couple of years, I think you need to have a couple of different game plans if you're going to succeed in the current championship format, because all teams are playing nearly differently. So for Limerick, they obviously conceded the puck out to the Limerick full back line. They didn't engage with them until they got to their 45, and that was a good ply. But because it's Tipperary's first time doing it, the supply of ball between the Tip 65 and 45 into the full forward line then was still back at the good old days at times where they head down and it was launched. So I think that's going to be the key. It'll be completely different now next Saturday night against Cork, so they might not get to rehearse this again. But I think when they look at the video during the week and look at how wasteful they were in possession, you need to play the ball 20, 30-yard passes when you know you're half forward and come back to support you to get our full forward line, to give them the opportunity to get back in. And that that connection was missing. And that's why I think in the second half, obviously it's hugely disappointing Tip failed to score from play. And we're probably lucky with the new advantage rule that Jason Ford had to pot 11 frees on the night.
Yeah, Michael, it's an interesting one from a Tip perspective because, you know, when we did our preview with Vincent Hogan last week, he was saying that he actually thought it was quite a vital game in terms of even getting some self-belief into the Tipperary team that they can take down this Limerick side. Did that manifest itself, do you think, at the weekend?
Yeah, no, well, it was crucial. It was crucial that they weren't defeated, obviously, because they were on the front foot and in pole position. So if they'd been beaten, I think it would have been slightly deflating. I think that's kind of banked now. There was a couple of different things that they did. I know they showed it on Allianz League Sunday last night. They let Limerick have the puck outs a lot of the time. There was one stage Aaron Costello was hit a puck out and I think he missed the roll lift twice and there still wasn't a Tip guy within 15 or 20 yards of him. They had no interest in pressing there, but once that pass was given to, say, 50 or 60 yards out from their own goal, the press came on straight away then. Tip decided to press Limerick in the middle kind of section of the field and not press them higher up. The Tip halfbacks as well, and even their two wing forwards, they nearly always had the half-back channels filled. So when Dermot Burns looked up to clear a ball or deliver a ball, and Kyle Hayes did the same, that diagonal out ball into space that you'd usually see Aaron Gillan run into, that ball wasn't on. So Limerick had to kind of vary it a bit different. So I definitely think Tip learned an awful lot. And it while they didn't get over the line, it's banked now. They know that they haven't been that competitive with Limerick in recent years. They know they can be now. I think it's a lot to do with, when I looked at the Tip team the other day, you're thinking, okay, this is a really mobile Tip team. That's a lot of guys are flexible in the positions that they can play in, and they'll be able to match Limerick physically to a fair extent. So I think from Liam Shealy's point of view, it's finding that balance, and particularly like Seamus Kennedy at centre back. He was injured last year, didn't see much championship action. Barry Heffernan only got back towards the tail end. They're two big, athletic, mobile defenders that can, you know, put it up to Garrod Hegarty, Tom Morrissey and these lads. So I definitely think Tip learned an awful lot, and I think it was crucial that at least they got something out of the game, because I think after putting everything on the line and really getting in the faces of Limerick, it would have been deflating if they'd been defeated by a point. But you saw the big Limerick spring off the bench. They brought on Keane Lynch, brought on Garrod Hegarty, and it was almost like it seamlessly slipped back into, you know, the gears that they were in at different stages last year. But crucial for Tip that they weren't defeated in the wind-up.
Yeah, and Peter Casey was another one who I think had a pretty prominent influence off the bench. Colm, from a Limerick perspective, how would John Kiley be feeling, do you think? It was funny, I saw his interview after the game and he was really pushing it that, Tipperary would look to have 2 more weeks done than us. So he was almost trying to psychologically say, like they got their draw because they've been working a little harder early in the season. Is it as you were for Limerick? Is there anything massively to take for them, do you think?
One thing I take from it is Seamus Flanagan, 0-4 beside his name, and that carries on the good form that he brought into last year. Now he's such a big, physical, rangy player, goes for everything so hard, And to see him pick off 4 points, I thought he was very prominent on Saturday night. That's a real lift, because if there's any line that Limerick really need to bolster, it's probably the full forward line. Obviously, Aaron Gallan is a standout feature there, but there's one position in there that probably floated around, and Casey, Graham Mulcahy, and Seamus Flanagan. Those, they alternate between those positions. And then Adrian Breen scores 3 points, and David Reedy chips in with I think it was 0-8, 6 from frees. So the main scorers on Saturday night were none of the regular players, and obviously Garrod Hegarty wasn't playing. So that's a very, very good sign for Limerick. I think they'll be very, very happy to have come back from 5 down. I think Tip will be a little bit disappointed that they didn't kill off that game when they had an opportunity, albeit they were probably missing as many frontline players as Limerick, and maybe even more. But still, it was their time to go and beat this Limerick team and lay down that marker, and it didn't really happen. And while both teams will take something from it, I think there's probably a little bit more left in Limerick. The impact that they had off the bench, the players that they have to bring back. I thought Kyle Hayes for a while there in the first half, he's just a force of nature, and he's gone from 11 to 7 and now into 6. Obviously, Declan Hannon wasn't playing, so he's gone into 6. He's such a powerful force there. I thought he was really dominant at times, but the main thing I take from him was Flanagan's showing for the ball and the 4 points he scored. That's a really, really good sign for Limerick in a position that they need him to really kick on in now.
Colm, you mentioned Kyle Hayes. I have to bring it up now because it was one of the big instances of the weekend. This advantage rule, I chatted to you last week about it, and I know we probably both thought it was going to be more evident in football, but it's there's a potential for hurling to be so stop-start now. And Kyle Hayes got a ball at one stage and was fouled, but he was actually gone, and Limerick were gone. And if the advantage had been played, who knows where the play would have been in 5 seconds. They would have definitely had a point chance. Potentially, could have had an overlap for a goal. And I just think with the rule that was brought in, which cannot be changed now, where they're basically blown for a free when there normally would have been a 5 second advantage, I'd just be worried about where we're going with hurling. Like if you look at when Tip played Limerick last year in the championship, I'd love to get a time comparison of how long the ball was in play in that championship game compared to the league game the other night. I don't see why. There are some things that need to be changed with hurling, don't get me wrong, and stopping the cynical element was definitely one. This advantage rule, I'm not so sure. I just think we're changing the game too much, and I don't think there's a need for it. That's just my own personal opinion. I just don't like it.
One thing I was conscious of before the weekend and looking at some of the games was how much is the free count actually going to go up? And the free count in the Limerick Tip game was 22-14. It was around 15-12 in the Cork Waterford game, with 22-14 between Limerick and Tip. I would say most games last year, championship games, were probably somewhere between 15 and 25. At a guess, without resorting to last year's reports where we document frees, they're around 15 to 25. This was up to 36 frees, and obviously the Cork Waterford game was over the 25 as well. So the number of frees are going to increase. Now, what was the basis? You were on the call, as I was, with the referees last week, and it was quite clear that this was one rule that they were not comfortable with. Their job is to implement the rules. They don't write them. They don't frame the rules. So that point was very much made to us. They would rather the advantage rule to continue. It makes their job a little easier. It makes the game easier to watch. Having said that, what was the basis for bringing in the advantage rule? Well, my understanding of it was from the rules committee last year was that they felt the advantage in hurling, and the reason this result is, it's a myth to say it's been brought in because of football. It was actually being brought in more so, my understanding of it was, for hurling, because the advantage is with the free taker who can put the ball over from 80 metres. Patrick Horgan put one over, albeit wind assisted, from 100 metres in Park Equive yesterday. He was just in front of his own 45-metre line. You see what Neil McManus, where he scored that point that we referenced earlier, where he was when he launched it. That's what hurlers, that's what they can do. They can launch the ball so far. And those that drafted the rule had that in mind. You play advantage, you may not get the score, but you get the free. The free takers are so good. That's where the advantage rests. I think it's going to be a much greater problem in football because you don't have that range from the free. So therefore, frees are going to be blown in the middle third of the field, and that they're not going to. The punishment on the team that commits the foul is not going to be as great as it is on the team in hurling. Having said that, remove the punishment and take it as a spectacle. It does not improve hurling as a spectacle. And I would agree with your point on that. Does it increase the punishment on the team that fouls? Probably. It probably does, because if you've Horgan and if you have Jason Ford and if you have, when he comes back, obviously Gallan, but David Reedy did a fine job. They're going to punish these fouls from far away. If they're blown straight away, there's a greater chance of a score from a lot of them coming out of that than there is from maybe play continuing on. That's a guess. I think that's the logic behind it. But in football, that's not the case. And so my belief is it's been brought in because of hurling, because of the distance that free takers can launch the ball. But I do agree, as a spectacle, and the possibilities of where Kyle Hayes was going to go with that, as a spectacle, the game does suffer.
No, I agree. It'll be a really interesting one to watch over the next few weeks, how it unfolds and what the kind of the narrative around it is then. Just a reminder, you're listening to the Throw On podcast in association with Allianz. And Brendan, just the last thing on the fouling in general. An interesting one with Limerick is, if you look at their 5 championship games last year in terms of scoreable frees in their 5 games, 9, 10, 8, 9 and 9, over 10 to Jason Ford at the weekend as well. Like, they're such a robust physical team. But if they were even able to cut down on their fouling a bit, who knows how dominant they could be.
Yeah, I looked at the game again, obviously, a few times, and in fairness to Limerick, they have so much upper body strength. When they put in the arm like that in the tackle, they're not clotheslining guys, but they're stopping them because they're physically strong. And the arm was just at shoulder high, which was slipping up, which meant then obviously a free. The other thing that they do is, and it's to slow your momentum, is as the guy passes you, they put a slight hand around the waist to give him a little tug, just to slow him up for that second. Normally the ref would go advantage, the game plays on, there might be a turnover out of it. But first, Colm Lyons the weekend, he was blowing all of those, and there's a little bit of rustiness as well, in fairness to Limerick. But I think what's happened is that the black card has obviously stopped the cynical fouling around the 21, but the new rule has increased the cynical fouling around the opposition 45. Because what you try to do now is you try to stop it at source. Because if Limerick get a run you, for example, and the wave coming up the pitch, it's only a small tug of the jersey or, oh, sorry, ref, and it's a free straight away. And inside then around the 65, you're going to see a lot of forwards who feel they're being fouled. They're going to put their 2 hands up in the air and say, please give me the free. And they're just going to stop playing. So it will put more emphasis on the technique of the tackle and of the way you're going about it. And certainly teams will have to adjust to that in the coming weeks. There's no doubt about that. But I certainly didn't see where this was going to be any issue in hurling. We want a free flow and fast game. You can imagine, like, and the lads mentioned on the Sunday game Sunday last night, Kieran Carey's point wouldn't have happened. How many points have we seen over the years? The centre-back gets the ball, he breaks out through the tackle, he kicks shackles off. Ken McGrath was brilliant at it. And they go this swashbuckling swing and flies over the bar. That's what kids are dreaming about at night. Now they're going to have to dream about, I'll win a free, and the free taker comes out and puts it over the bar. And it's going to be a fair damn squib when we get supporters back in. There's going to be programs being thrown every direction at the pitch going, my God, just let them hurl, you know what I mean? And that's going to be the frustration.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely an interesting one to watch out for. And Michael, the other kind of big game at the weekend, Cork Waterford yesterday, 5 goals for Cork, which I saw a statistic that was more than they scored in their league campaign in 17, 18 and 19. So it shows just how prolific they were yesterday. I saw people getting quite excited about it. Even Donald Cusack was kind of very, very enthusiastic in the Sunday game. How much do you take from that? Is this a sign of a new Cork, or is it just an early season league game where, I think in Colm's report, he said there was a challenge match feel by the end of it, and maybe that contributed to some of those goals at the end?
Yeah, no, I know Brendan has always said that if hurling was played below the shoulder, Cork would win the All-Ireland every year. And there was a little bit of an exhibition game kind of feel to this. But I think the big thing with Cork is, like, green flags were the only thing that were undermined. Breaking the tackle and breaking the line was the only thing that were undermined. I chatted to Ben O'Connor last November, and he's no problem in calling out a load of the forwards, saying that a lot of them were just happy to get their name on the score sheet, and they wouldn't necessarily give the pass when there was a man in a better position with an overlap possibly on. Yesterday it was the exact opposite of that. The pass was nearly always given. There was a man either side of the ball carrier around the 45. They were trying to break the line the whole time. Shane Kingston picked up a ball about 35 yards out, saw that he had a potential foot race against the Waterford defender, took him on and finished to the net lovely. They had an eye for goal yesterday. They had a killer instinct to them. We know what they can do with the ball, so that's a very positive thing. Obviously, they were doing with the ball, but without the ball, you'd always question, do the Cork forwards in particular work hard enough to hold the ball up enough at the other end of the pitch? I thought they did that well yesterday. There was lots of swarm tackling going on. There was 2 or 3 guys getting around Waterford guys with the ball. It did look like a bit of a change in mentality. Brendan will tell you, when they played Cork back in the day, when Donal O'Grady was over them, he focused like half an hour every night on hooking and blocking, and just that effort in tackling and annoying another team, and that would bring itself to the pitch on match day. And it looks like his influence has kind of already been felt with this team here. Now, obviously, one swallow doesn't make a summer, and there was issues at the heart of the Waterford defence. It was a landing strip at different stages there, and Cork were just walking through them sometimes. But from a Cork point of view, based on everything we saw last year, this does look like a bit of a radical change. They're going to have to do it and repeat it over and over again. But this year's league and championship is going to be played in prime conditions for them, a top of the ground team. Last year probably wasn't, and they would have been written off in many quarters before the championship started in a winter championship. Things look like they're going to suit them this year, and they look like they're playing a style that suits them as well. They've loads of fast, quick attacking players, and they just look like they want to go for the jugular a bit more, which is exciting if you're from Cork.
Yeah, Colm, for you being there, what jumped out to you? Was it as impressive in person as it might have appeared when you see the score sheet or watch the highlights?
It was impressive. Obviously, the goals and the creation of the goal chances, and even the creation of the goal chances that they didn't take. At one point, Tim O'Mahony came through, and there was a very, very easy point option on from. He had scored one earlier, and he passed to Patrick Horgan. He passed to Patrick Horgan on his outside, and Billy Nolan came out and blocked it with his body. That was one of the goal chances, and there was very much a point on there. And maybe the percentage for the goal wasn't as great, but they went for that percentage anyway, and it didn't come off. I'd say by my reckoning, they created 10 goal chances. Now that was as much down to a very ragged Waterford defence, albeit now Kieran Bennett played well in an attacking context, and Iarla Daly, as he did last year's All-Ireland final, he did have some good moments, but I thought Cork were utterly dominant with O'Mahony at half-back. I thought Mark Coleman was very good, and obviously Dara Fitzgibbon, he just perpetual motion from him. He scored 3 points, 3 more shots that drifted wide. There was a real mobility and willingness to support among the Cork players, and willingness to go short and keep the ball to hand and keep it alive. And they weren't afraid of making mistakes. That's one thing that I was that did come across, and they weren't afraid to have a go and to run down channels. And Kingston made a big difference, obviously, when he came on against what I thought was probably a tiring Waterford that were flagging a big effort to come from 11 points down to within 4, and his goal broke that. But yeah, I liked a lot of what Cork did. I don't think they're going to be physical enough to take out Limerick or Galway or even Tipperary, that kind of team just yet. But they're certainly, on the basis of what they did against Waterford, even in the opening game of the league last year, which was last January, 12 months, and in last year's championship, obviously different conditions, but a different Cork team, you would have to say. Waterford, they lacked the leadership. I always like Jamie Barron in midfield for Waterford. He brings great energy to it. They just didn't have that yesterday. Callum Lyons moved in there, not as prominent, got into a couple of good attacking positions, but I thought he's obviously a better half-back coming from those deeper positions. Austin Gleeson was really good. Anything he did turned to gold. He got 5 points, and a couple of them were absolutely brilliant. And Stephen Bennett. So from that point of view, some of Waterford's main players actually kicked on from last year, but they'd be very, very disappointed with the performance overall of their half-forward line. I think all 3 were taken off in the end, and it wasn't a surprise. They made no impact against that Cork half-back line, which was really strong. So all told, Cork showed a willingness to really go for it, and I thought it was a positive afternoon for them.
Yeah, Brennan, what's kind of your assessment of the two teams now heading, towards a championship, which isn't that far away? Obviously, Cork, after a disappointing 2020, Waterford having got to the All-Ireland final. Like, from what you saw yesterday, are you reading much into their prospects, or how do you view them shaping up?
Well, I think Cork gave a big statement of intent back before a ball was even pucked or were even still in lockdown, when a number of players said that they were retiring out of the panel. And they brought in fresh blood. Was like Collins deciding the goals is extremely good. He's took a few chances and he was bowled, but that's, again, like Colm said, they're given the freedom to play and express themselves. But the tackle was something that I was really, really impressed with Cork yesterday. They really broke down Waterford. Like Waterford, if in rugby analogy, when they got the ball, Waterford off the back of the ruck, they were too static. They weren't moving. And the real test for Cork will obviously be the next couple of weeks. They'll play Tipperary now in Thurles next Saturday evening. And when the first 3 or 4 or 5 runs up the pitch breaks down, that's when we'll see whether the Cork project is really on the rails and the players believe it. Because last year they tippy-tappied around Tipperary for long periods when they were playing against the wind. Look really, really good now. They had tip on the rack in the Gaelic grounds. And then a couple of passes broke down and they collapsed. So I think Donal O'Grady's introduction is huge for him. The management ticket in Cork was already extremely strong with great pedigree. But I think Donal O'Grady, and you could see that's why Donal Logan, I think, was so excited last night. He knows what Donal O'Grady can do in the setup, the same way I'd hear him and O'Shea's name and I'd get the same buzz out of it. So, he'll understand what Donal O'Grady's trying to do. From a Waterford point of view, I'd worry a little bit for Liam Cahill. He's got a problem down the middle. Jamie Byrne obviously not been there, he'll be back, but Ty de Burke is a huge loss. Ty de Burke makes players around him look really good and better, and now that he's not playing, it gives the likes of Fitzgerald and all a bit more bravery to run down the middle and say, well, your man's not there, he's not going to turn me upside down, and all teams will be looking at that. But I'm sure Liam Cahill, knowing that the management now he has and Mikey Beavens, they'll find some way around that. But certainly, unless they find a way to plug the centre of that defence, and the half-forward line, the lads mentioned, is obviously a key, and they didn't really fire at all. Montgomery was very disappointing on the day. But again, if you think about it, he's only in year 2, really, of his inter-county career, so he's going to have up and down days like that. But certainly Cork have the green shoots they'd be looking for. But when they come under pressure in the next couple of league games, it'll be interesting to see how they respond to it. And then we'll know more, I think, after that as to whether it's really sticking with the players or not.
Yeah, no, a lot of interesting teams to see now how they kick on after their week 1. And just to finish it out, guys, we have 3 games left in Division 1 and we have 3 panellists. So I might give you one each to give your thoughts on, Michael. Wexford Laois, a comfortable enough win in the end for Wexford. I enjoyed in Vincent Hogan's report. The third quarter bollocking that Davy Fitzgerald gave his players was audible for everyone to hear. There was a few expletives in there, I think. Poor Laois effort, watching from the highlights and some of the reaction there. Like, what's your view on it?
Yeah, one of the things that's come out of no spectators been at matches is that journalists and anyone that's around can hear exactly what's going on in these huddles. I think it's an unnamed Kilkenny player, but someone basically at the third quarter of the Dublin Kilkenny game when it was 16-all, basically the only voice you could hear was somebody in there saying that we've been talking about the third quarter for the last 6 months. And they'd basically squandered a lead in the third quarter against Waterford last year and had done the same against Dublin, and then they kicked on yesterday. And then you could hear Davy obviously, well, you'd hear him anyway, even if there was spectators. But just to see that, like, they did really kick on in that last quarter. They always had Laois at arm's length and they did a lot of good things, but when they had to, they kicked on. I think from a Wexford point of view, the most promising thing was there was no energy last year, and with the game plan that they play, it's all action and everybody has to be on point. There was a lot of energy there yesterday. Even when Rory O'Connor came on, he burst down through that middle of the Laois defence. Now the Laois defending wasn't great, but he was getting in those attacking positions, scored a goal, won a penalty. Dermot O'Keefe was in those attacking positions as well. Conor Hearn got forward an awful lot. I think the big thing with Wexford is Conor Hearn, Gavin Bailey, Seamus Casey, who I didn't know was a goalkeeper, played in goals at the weekend and was very good. So he's putting pressure on Mark Fanning. Mikey O'Dwyer got 2 goals. They're new names that we hadn't heard before, and that's 5 potentially new players for Wexford. We've probably bemoaned their lack of squad depth in recent years. So to have 5 guys there, not saying they're all going to start championship, but they're all options now. And it increases the competition in the squad. So that can only be good from a Wexford point of view. From a Laois point of view, they were probably just trying to hold into the game. But when Wexford pushed the turbo button, there was only one winner, and they won pulling up, really.
Yeah, and Colm and Parnell Park on Saturday. Kilkenny, Dublin. Kilkenny, I think 5-point winners in the end. Brian Cody, a lot of praise for Martin Keown for his 1-4 haul. Another disappointing, I suppose, outing for Dublin under Matty Kenny. They would have hoped to hit the ground running after a disappointing 2020. Didn't really materialise.
Yeah, the goal broke this game, really, Keown's goal. And obviously the point was made, well, would he have been taken down outside the box if the rules were different? It certainly looked at that way, that there was a hesitancy from James Madden at that point, maybe to pull him down. It probably would have been done before Keown turned inside, finished that, and that really broke it, because Dublin had got level. You could see the contest was really, really warming up at that stage. But Pádraig Walsh was very good, very, very good for Kilkenny driving forward. Kilkenny did just enough to get home and see out the game easily. It wasn't a thoroughly convincing win, but having said that, they had a very close championship game. Obviously, Kilkenny were well ahead last year, and Dublin came back. So I think the positives for Kilkenny is that it's a win. Obviously, Dara Corcoran had a decent match as well. Walsh's form was good. TJ Reid was quiet enough, but Keown was really with 1-4. He was the real springer. Obviously, he was good last year in the first half of the All-Ireland semi-final, but he looks like he could be a leader. And Brian Cody was quite strong in his praise for him afterwards, especially his work rate. And maybe there's a consideration that he's a real Brian Cody type of player. Adrian Mullen came off at halftime, obviously his first game back, but be interested to see how he develops now over the next few weeks, and what sort of game time he'll get into him after his injury. But positive enough start for Kilkenny without them setting the world alight. I think Brian Cody will be really, really keen. Can he get a settled midfield? That's a big thing for Kilkenny. They haven't really been able to go at the same midfield pairing for a long, long time now, and they've been chopping and changing between midfield pairings. I think that's something that they really need to fix, and get a fixed centre back as well.
And Brendan, just to finish things off, then Galway Westmeath on the Saturday. Galway hitting 5:34 without Joe Canning as some going, and I think it's what summed it up. I think was the Westmeath manager after the game. I think he was a bit taken aback by just how relentless and how on it Galway looked. I know it's Westmeath; there'll be bigger tests to come, but to come straight out of the lockdown period and the inactivity and to hit so many scores is very impressive.
It is, and if you line up both teams beside each other, it shows the difference between the dedication and the time and all that's spent by the Galway players at elite levels. We're talking about the body shape of all of them, like it's just so strong. They just walk out over the top of you. And in fairness to Westmeath, they I know they win or lose the toss. And there's Shane O'Brien. It's a tough task up there in Division 1 hurling, but they were 3-18 to 10 points down at half time. So you've been given that team talk, like it's hard to know what you say to the lads. Like they were physically and hurling wise just outclassed on the day. Now Galway and Shane O'Neill will be delighted because it had a ruthlessness to what they were doing. Flynn came on as a sub. Nyland was extremely good. Now he scored 10, 13 points, 10 from frees, but he was buzzing around. Cannon got his goal. Cooney, they're very, very strong and seasoned team, Galway are. And like you said, it's a huge score to put up without Joe Canning, but the next day out for Galway will be the big one. And we'll see, it puts them in, they're probably at their most vulnerable now in the next couple of weeks, Galway. Having put away Westmeath like they did, we're all saying how ruthless they are. The reality is Westmeath, in fairness to them, are struggling. I saw them last year in the Joe McDonagh when Kerry played them. They were under serious pressure. And Shane O'Brien up there is under the cosh a bit, but they'll steady up, I'm sure. But Galway going forward now will have a tough test in the next couple of rounds of the league. So we'll see then really, and we'll know more after a couple more rounds as to where they're at.
Just a quick word, Will, on the two mad things that happened in that game. Davy Glennon made his debut for Westmeath against Galway in Mullingar, and he made his debut for Galway in 2012 against Westmeath in Mullingar. So I don't know if anything like that's ever happened before. And Kieran Doyle's point, the volleyed point after about 45 yards out without taking a touch, you'd be hard pressed to see a better score for the rest of the year. I don't even know how you even think of doing something like that. It was great to see a bit of kind of ingenuity, and that was an unbelievable point.
Well, if you'd seen the first 35 or 40 minutes of the match, you'd seen why he did it, because when they got the ball in their hand, they were swarmed, turned over. So there'll be a few baseball teams in America, I'd say, might be giving them the call. So if Westmeath go out of the championship early, he could find himself in playing with the Red Sox or whatever later in the year.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of exciting games to come over the next few weeks. But for now, it's just great to have them back in the first place, and great to have you all back with us as well. Brendan, Colm, Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks,
guys.
Sorry. That's all we have time for this week on the Throw On podcast in association with Allianz. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another podcast. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Allianz. Supporting all 32 counties through the Allianz Leagues.